A New York woman was viciously stabbed to death inside of her Manhattan apartment, and police believe her ex-boyfriend is behind it. We're going to dig into what police found when they arrived at the scene, what we know about the victim, and what we know about the suspect, all with former NYPD Sergeant Joseph Giacalone. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, let's go over to New York City, because officers there made a brutal discovery last week. After reports of a loud fight, they find 33-year-old Melanie Woods in the bathtub with multiple stab wounds to her neck and body. Prosecutors say that she had been stabbed more than 20 times. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The victim's on-again, off-again boyfriend, 51-year-old Candido Rodriguez, was arrested on Thursday. He's been charged with murder. Pleaded not guilty during an arraignment the next day. He's being held without bail. We'll get more into that in a second. But the way this all went down is family had called for a welfare check on the evening of April 23rd because Melanie was supposed to fly to California, where I believe she's from, but she never got on the plane. So a friend tracked her location to her apartment. They were obviously worried about this. They were concerned, and police busted in. When they got there, there was reportedly a table partially blocking the apartment door from the inside. A neighbor told police that they saw Rodriguez in the building stairwell around 7 a.m. Then he was seen on surveillance video leaving about an hour later. Prosecutors believe Rodriguez was stalking the victim, that he had been waiting for her to return from an early morning walk with her dog. Prosecutor Marcel Lupiski says that Woods had told Rodriguez that they were done, not to contact her anymore. Prosecutors say he didn't do that. Now, the Daily Mail has reported that Rodriguez wailed as he was brought into court. This is for his arraignment, that he was inconsolable during the hearing, and that his attorney asked the court for him to receive immediate medical treatment. So the judge put Mr. Rodriguez on suicide watch in the jail. Now, let's talk about Melanie Woods, because by all accounts, she was just an absolute joy, just a wonderful, wonderful person. She was known for her activism in whatever community she was living in. She attended UCLA in Southern California, had a bachelor's in communication studies with a minor in applied linguistics and language teaching. That's our understanding. She worked with the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center and the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, helping to coordinate events and outreach. She moved to New York for graduate school, attending Columbia University School of Public Health, where she earned a master's degree, had a focus on sexuality and sexual and reproductive health. In New York, Woods worked as a coordinator during the COVID-19 pandemic. She worked with the CDC Foundation's COVID-19 emergency response workforce, as well as the New York City Health and Hospitals. Woods' dad set up a GoFundMe page to raise money to bring Woods' body back to California, again, her home state. It's raised more than $40,000 so far. Now, in a statement on the GoFundMe page, the family said, to know Melanie was to love her. Melanie was a lover of traveling, a best friend to many, an adventure seeker, a loving dog mom. She was someone who always rooted for the underdog and loved to see people thrive and succeed. She was a vibrant soul who brought out the best in anyone around her. This we will never forget. And I'll tell you what, we'll actually put the link to this GoFundMe page in the description, in our YouTube description. Now, her former boss, Joe Hollander, the CEO of the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center, said that Woods was committed to the safety of others. He told the New York Daily News, quote, she was filled with such incredible joy. She was so compassionate. She was one of the most authentic people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. It's not hyperbolic to say that she was the light in every room that she entered. As for Mr. Rodriguez, not a lot is known. He reportedly told police that he didn't have any involvement in Woods' death, said that he was asleep in his own home that was more than 20 blocks away. But again, witnesses, surveillance footage seem to contradict that statement. And this is a really awful case, but I want to talk about what we can expect and what's happening behind the scenes. So let me bring in Joseph Giacalone, retired NYPD sergeant and adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Joe, good to have you back on. I first want to start with the idea of where this happened, right? So many of the cases we cover, we talk about how killings happen in rural areas, they happen in homes. There's something incredibly disturbing and nefarious and kind of alarming that you have someone who's killed seemingly in their apartment, found in their bathtub in a major metropolitan city, right? That part of it always I find to be particularly chilling.
Yes, and unfortunately, it does happen quite often, specifically in domestic violence or intimate partner violence cases. And it's something where you could see where it happened in the bathtub. I don't think that was planned. I think that there might have been a fight that happened outside of that location. And what happens is people often retreat to the bathroom as a refuge point. And it just so happened that she got cornered there, and this is where this horrific event happened.
And before we even get into some of the reporting about her injuries, can you just talk to me about what is it like to respond to a scene like that?
Sure, and unfortunately, as you know, as a cop, especially I started in the in early 1990s, 1992. I got hired, so it was at the near the height of homicides in the city, and you end up responding to a lot of these things. You end up becoming almost desensitized, so to speak. You develop your own mechanisms and to cope and to deal with them because you want to make sure you keep your own mental health uh, good. And I mean, and as cops and firemen and EMS workers, you respond to so many of these things that eventually it can take its toll on you psychologically and physiologically too. But
Yeah.
as police officers, you're trained to secure the scene, try to find out, if there are witnesses in or around that area, try to detain them there. But the most important aspect for patrol officers, those uniformed cops that respond, is to aid the victim if you possibly can. That's always the number one goal, even if it means the perpetrator fleeing or going out a back window. It's always go to the victim first.
And unfortunately, there was nothing to be done for Melanie Woods here. It's just a really horrifying crime scene. And again, I just want to highlight the work that you guys do and have done. I mean, it's impossible to think about, but this is the reality of a lot of these crimes. So, talk to me about the injuries because before we went on air, you said you had a little bit of an issue with how it's being reported, what these injuries are, and maybe more importantly, what these injuries are not.
Yeah, it's just about a pet peeve of mine. When you hear a laceration, a lot of times people think that's what it means by a cut. Actually, the medical examiner defines a laceration as something done with blunt force trauma. Somebody's hit with something, a candlestick, a bat, those kind of things that leaves an injury that bridges. Now, when you're dealing with sharp force injuries, that's how you're supposed to describe them. Sharp force injuries could be puncture wounds, can be stab wounds, and it could be incise wounds, which are those slashings which happen, which is unfortunately more than likely what happens in a case like this when you have somebody that is attacked with a knife. There is, I think they said maybe over 20 times that she was attacked with this knife, which means all kinds of different of wounds of ones I just explained. Now you say, why is that important? Because there's going to be other forensic evidence like blood spatter and all the other different things that go along with it, and including what often happens in cases like this, because they're so violent, you always seem to think that it is something very personal in regards to that overkill, right? There's no reason to stab somebody 20 times unless you are really angry at them. And historically, you don't see strangers getting that angry with people. So police often tend to look at those people closest to the victims in all cases, but specifically when there is a knife involved. And those are just some of the things that you put together.
It's a pretty horrifying case. Whenever we cover these kinds of stories, particularly domestic violence stories, which again is the accusation here, it's scary to think about how well do you know the people in your life? Who are you surrounding yourself with? Do you really know? But that's why I want to talk about our incredible sponsor who may be able to help, Truthfinder. Truthfinder is a service that can provide actual safety for you guys. I don't say that lightly. I say that because Truthfinder is one of the largest public records search services in the United States. Their whole goal is to help people like you learn a little bit more about the people in their lives. And here's how it works. You go on their website, truthfinder.com, and you type in a name. Let's say your new neighbor. And let's say your new neighbor is me, Jesse Weber. You type in my name, and within minutes and a paid subscription purchase, you can access unlimited reports that can include information like phone numbers, location history, criminal and traffic records, including possible arrests and criminal convictions. I don't have those, but you get the idea. Now, Truthfinder has been partnering with Law&Crime for a while now. We actually use it to research some of the cases that we've been covering here on Sidebar. But generally speaking, it is a service that can provide peace of mind when you do these unlimited public record searches. Also, what's really useful? From within the report, you can search an address, like your home address, to see registered sex offenders that may live in that area too. And that's the point. Unless you use Truthfinder, you may never really know the reality about the people around you. Also, let me tell you this, Truthfinder, credible resource to use when reconnecting with people. You might not have thought about this. Long lost friends, family members you haven't spoken to in a while. You can use Truthfinder to help track down these people's information. It is a great tool. And here's the kicker. Right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. Yeah, just go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. Hope you check it out. He's charged with murder, and he's also charged with criminal possession of a weapon in the first degree, I believe. So talk to me about, and there's evidence, again, that he was stalking her, that he was following her. You could say this is deliberation, this is planning it. But there's something about that crime scene, right, and that the level of the attack. Do you think that there's something there for a defense attorney to say, wait a minute, maybe this was a manslaughter type of case. Maybe he didn't plan this. Maybe he really didn't intend to kill her. Again, we're in the preliminary stages of this, but there's something about this level of attack that could very well be a brutal, cold-blooded killing. But I also wonder if there's something that defense attorneys could work with and say, there might be more to the story here.
Well, there's a lot to unpack with that question, right? So one of the things that the investigators are going to be looking for is, where did the knife come from? Did it come from the apartment itself, or did he bring the knife with him, right? Because that could lead down to a whole other scenario per se. More than likely, it came from inside the apartment. That's why I said I think this argument started somewhere else within the house, and this is something that the uniform cops, when they first respond, we always teach them too, to look for certain things that got knocked over, things that looked at, because you want to show that progression. Because as the crime scene photographer and the crime scene unit comes in there, they want to follow that same progression about where this thing started at the beginning. Now, they have said that there are cell phone records in regards to text messages that were sent that were kind of all over the place, so to speak. They didn't really get into what exactly happened, but they did use the word, I think, threat in one of the newspaper articles, that there were threats that were made in there. There's the question that comes down to, too, is that I was thinking about is, how did he get there, right? So she comes home and he's there, right? So did he enter her apartment illegally, aka a burglary, waiting for her to come in there? So yeah, the defense is going to have a difficult time, trying to explain anything else other than that. They're going to probably just look at how this case was investigated and the evidence secured and those kind of things. And I'll tell you, the NYPD does a pretty good job with that, dotting their I's and crossing their T's. So there's a tough road ahead for the defense.
On top of the fact that if I were just to tell you that she's murdered in an apartment, you would say, okay, who has access to the apartment? Who has a grudge against her? And she seemed to be just the most lovely person. And so you narrow it down to people who would have had access, the opportunity. You would immediately think of perhaps a loved one, or you might think of romantic interest. But then you couple it with the witness accounts. You couple it with the surveillance footage. I don't really see how this is not an open and shut case. I'll give you your perspective on that. But, or I mean, at least to prove that he was the one who did it, because he's saying he didn't do it, right? As of right now, he's not saying, well, yeah, I did it, but there's more to the story. He's saying he didn't do it. It seems, at least based on initial reporting, that's going to be very hard for him to argue against.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, I wouldn't be a bit surprised down the road if there's a plea taken in certain cases like this. It happens quite often. Very few cases go to trial, specifically cases that might have as much evidence stacked up against your client as this one may have. And that's the way it's shaping up. Because remember, we really still don't know per se. But you know what? The video surveillance, the text messages, the witnesses that said they saw him there, and his alibi as I'm sleeping is not very good in that respect. But also remember, they're going to look at the cell phone technology too. They're going to try to place him there with his cell phone and try to figure out where that was.
What do you make of the table that was apparently blocking the door?
Well, one of two things. It depends on, if it's blocking the entire door, he had to climb out the window on a fire escape or something like that to try to get out of the building. And then that becomes a tough thing about where did the video surveillance. It might have just been that he had it close enough that he can sneak out the door and close it. But at that point, unless that was there, got pushed, let's say maybe when the fight occurred, but that seems unlikely too. But he probably set it up so that the police couldn't come, or somebody else, maybe a nosy neighbor or something like that, who might have heard the commotion, because they do have a good estimated time of death here, right? Because a lot of people said at around 8 o'clock, the noise stopped. So investigators are going to piece all that together in the post-mortem interval and all the different things that the medical legal investigator or the ME, whoever showed up there, is going to help the police with that estimated time of death too.
And when you commit a killing in a metropolitan area, a metropolitan city like this, there are more eyewitnesses. There is more surveillance footage. It seems to me demonstrably harder to try to get away with it than if you were in a rural kind of setting. Talk to me about, and you talked about it a little bit, but what do you think investigators are doing right now? What's happening behind the scenes? What evidence are they collecting? What pieces of the puzzle are they trying to fit in right now?
Well, I'm sure they already executed a search warrant on his apartment, and that's the main thing because they're looking for the clothes that he was wearing the morning that he was seen on the surveillance video in that place. Because unfortunately, if you stab somebody 20 times or slash them, there's a good possibility that there's going to be forensic evidence on you, right? The blood or maybe hair follicles, right? The Locard's exchange principle, the theory of transfer between two objects. Somebody leaves something and someone takes something behind. So I think investigators will be keying in on that, including his shoes, because if you have they didn't specify how much blood was there, but I've seen cases like this where there's an awful lot. Now, it did happen in the bathtub area. So if it all happened, it could be contained in there, but there's a good possibility that he stepped in it too, or got some spatter on his shoes, or his socks, or his shirt, or his pants. So that's, I think, to me, number one. If they can recover those clothes, meaning looking through the garbage bins, looking through all the different things, if they don't find it there, because I think that becomes an important part of the evidence in this case.
And I got to ask you, this reporting that he was wailing in court, now being put on suicide watch. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, is he wailing because of what he did or wailing because he got caught, right? That's the, from the cop's perspective, we always say is you're crying because you got caught. So it's not, I would say it's not probably a good idea to ask me that question because at this point, it seems as if they definitely have enough evidence for probable cause to make the arrest that he's responsible for her death. So I don't feel sorry for him at all. But you know what? Suicide watch in many of these cases, specifically in domestic violence cases, is always on the table because.
But is it hard? Is that like a high burden for a judge to say, all right, we're remanding him. He's going to be on suicide watch. Is it easy to get that? Or is the judge or the court saying, wait a second, there's something here?
Yeah, it's very easy to get that because nobody wants that on their conscience either. When you have the opportunity to say that. And if somebody is wailing and crying in court or acting, not of their right mind at that moment, then yeah, it's always a good idea to put them on suicide watch because nobody wants to see anybody, hurt themselves or harm themselves or others once they're in jail too. So it's just kind of a 101 kind of step for the judge. I think it was a good idea.
Joseph Jackalone, thanks so much for giving your perspective. I wish I was talking to you under better circumstances. Really, really sad case, but really appreciate it nonetheless. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Chase.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.